Hello guys, today I'm going to be servicing a Zeiss Distagon 28mm f2 lens for the Contax Yashica mount, which has very stiff focus, a common problem with this lens. In order to properly fix this problem, I will have to disassemble this lens completely, clean up and apply new grease to the focusing helicoid. While at it, I will also perform some basic maintenance and cleaning. Before we dive into the servicing part, here are a few facts about this lens. If you're not interested, you can of course skip to the servicing part. People know this lens as the Hollywood, supposedly for its cinematic rendering, but it really just renders the same grade as every other Zeiss lens from the era. They say it's the same design with the Zeiss 28mm t2.1 standard speed made for cinema cameras, but this is not true. It has a couple of similarities in the design, very similar coating from the era, but that's that. The 28mm f2 lens was only made between 1976 and 1979 as an AE lens. Then, a few years later, when Zeiss were presenting their new MM system to the public, they have converted some of the older AE stock of this lens into MM versions by changing the iris mechanism. So, every MM version of this lens was initially made as an AE lens, and all the optics were created and coated in the mid-late 70s, before the MM system was even invented. They were all made in West Germany, and there is no Japanese version of this lens. I have serviced and tested both Contax AE and MM versions of this lens, and I can guarantee you they're exactly the same mechanically and optically, except the different iris mechanism on the back, which, despite internet myths about changed coatings, serial matching and all that stuff, the iris mechanism is the only true difference between the Contax AE and MM lenses. There's some other versions, like the Rolei HFT one, which is the same lens with the same coating and was made by Zeiss up to about 1985. Pentax also licensed this design for the super multi-coated Pentax 28mm f2 for their Pentax K cameras, but those were actually coated and assembled by Pentax. Later, in 2007, Zeiss presented the now classic Distagon 28mm f2 ZE and ZF lenses for Canon and Nikon mounts. Those lenses also share the same basic design with the original Contax lens, but after recalculation with newer techniques, there is a little correction of splitting the third element from the back and creating a new doublet with what was previously the fourth element. The common problems that come up with this lens are the very stiff focus because of the hardened grease when the lens hasn't been serviced for a while, some light haze on the back group, and also incorrect calibration of the floating group in the front, usually because somebody who doesn't understand how this lens works attempted to open it up. The front element is almost flat, and just like the Contax 35mm 1.4 lens, it's quite easy for its coating to start wearing off with thin scratches if improperly cleaned. The same element is also painted around, so if it starts losing its paint for some reason, it might appear to have some inner dots or lines, what some people call syneuritis. Of course, all these are not really an important performance problem, and they don't affect the image to any meaningful degree. Other than that, this is a very well made lens, and I trust its original manufacturing so much that I would even buy one blindly, providing I will service it later anyways, as I don't expect any permanent image affecting flaws. You can see the interesting diagram of this lens with one cemented doublet. Unlike later Contaxes that were made in the mid-80s and 90s, lens doublets cemented during the earlier Contax era are very rare to separate. The whole front group is part of what's called a floating element and is taken out together in one assembly. The three back elements can be taken out from the back side, leaving the one that sits right behind the iris, which can be removed independently from the front side. The elements around the iris are always the more susceptible to haze and dust, of course. You see how the middle element of the front group has a reversed shape by design. I have a little backstory about this element. This is funny now, but back in the day when I had much less idea about lenses servicing, I had paid some quite well-known professional to service my old copy of this lens. Without even checking the lens, the guy disassembled it and started working on it. Wow, he's such an expert, I thought. Then he started sending me emails about how this lens was faulty from factory and some other pretty interesting conspiracy theories. That was weird to me because I was using that lens perfectly great up to that day, making beautiful images. He said the lens couldn't focus correctly and he asked my permission to do some hacks on the focusing system and the lens body so it could be made usable again. I was convinced that the lens was supposed to be even better than what I knew and was happy with before, and this experienced technician found some little defect and he could fix it. After a couple of weeks, he said he made the lens as good as it can be and he sent it back after charging me some good money for the service. I was shocked when I received the lens because the image was so weird, almost like you see through some alien eyes. I didn't even take any pictures with it because I was so disappointed and frustrated about it. Even with my limited experience back then, I had a strong suspicion that something was optically incorrect, but I couldn't believe that would be the case since that was such an experienced and well-praised technician. Having nothing to lose really, I slowly took the courage to open the lens up bit by bit in the blind and actually find out that the guy had put the second element in a reverse position, and that's what was causing the problem. I flipped the element as shown in the original diagram and magically the lens was perfect again. When confronted about it, he never admitted the mistake and he started saying that I'm some kind of scammer and I'm running some sort of sim and offered me a bribe so I don't talk about it to anybody. I just never replied and ran away because I think my time worth much more than stressing out and fighting with a crazy person. I have also took some time to reverse all the hacks he had done. I made this lens great again and it's now at the hands of a great filmmaker in Europe making nice images. This was a huge confidence boost to me and it helped me reaching the level I am at now at lens servicing. But enough with the stories, let's get to the bench. So, I received this 28mm f2, with the main complaint being the stiff focus. Before I do anything else, I of course charged the lens so I can compare it against other copies that I have serviced before, and I found out it was performing as expected. I checked and documented the lens throughout and I didn't find any problems or dirt in the inner optics that would require cleaning. There were a couple of dusts inside the front group, but opening it up in an attempt to clean those few dusts would most likely introduce much more microdust, and I have a strategy to leave things that don't really need attention alone. The lettering on the lens body was also quite yellowed. I would attempt to clean that after disassembly, and if it wouldn't come off, I would just repaint it. I started by taking off the front ring of the lens with the right size of the lens rubber tool. Next, I had to deal with the lens floating group, which requires a little special attention. This group has its own secondary helicoids, so when the focus is turned, along with the normal back and forth focusing movement of the back group, the front group actually rotates. I've measured the distance of the ring around the floating group when the lens is at infinity. This way, I know at about what distance the front group has to sit when reassembled. I could also mark the exit point at the exact angle so I can insert back the group as it was, but I like to actually calibrate floating groups on a chart later, so just a rough measurement will do. Calibrating on the chart allows me to make sure the lens performs optimally regardless of its previous calibration. After I took the 3 screws from the connecting ring, the front group can be unscrewed. In this case, a screw fell on the iris blades, a very good reason why working with the iris closed is a very good practice. I like using plastic tweezers when I can in order to avoid scratching any surface. Next, there was the front part of the lens barrel that is secured with 3 screws. I like spending a lot of time inspecting everything and checking the situation despite knowing this lens pretty well. Many times you can find unexpected things in these lenses. There is a little screw that is used to set the correct position of the optical assembly against the body. If this is set incorrectly, the iris won't open or close fully. That screw is not enough to hold the optical assembly by its own, so I make sure not to turn the lens upside down as it will fall off. I used a little acetone to clean up the thread lock and take off the screw. Then I took the assembly out, which includes the back lens group and the iris. From this point, we're left with mechanical parts only. First, I take the rubber from the focusing ring off. Under that, there are 3 screws that connect the focusing ring with the focusing helicoid, which, by the way, are the screws that you can adjust the infinity focus. I've set and made sure to keep the focusing ring at infinity. Then, by taking off the screws, one can take the focusing ring off completely, which is necessary for regreasing the helicoid. This is the crucial point that the helicoids have to be marked to guarantee correct reassembly. First though, I make a mark at where the ring that the focusing ring screws on actually sits, which ensures an easier assembly later. Then I make marks at where the helicoids were at when the lens was focused at infinity, one at the inner and one at the outer part. At this point I have decided to take off the mount part of the lens, as I like to measure the helicoids without the mount. Sometimes the mount can be stuck on the lens barrel due to thread lock that slipped from the screws. I use rotational force with the rubber tool to remove it. Then I remove the iris ring along with the clicking ball. At this point I have measured the helicoids, which is not really that necessary but good practice to avoid any mistakes. There is also this little pin that connects the iris ring with the iris mechanism. Now I'm ready to take off the helicoid keys, which will uncouple the helicoid. Each key is a little different and with different set of screws, so I make sure to remember what goes where. I slowly start rotating the inner helicoid out, being careful to feel at what point it's going to decouple. I observe the mark I made on the inner helicoid and where it decouples with the outer one. Although there is a separate mark there from factory or a previous service, I like to make my own as well. Now I know this is where the helicoid is coupled. After this, I can unscrew the outer helicoid as well. Since I have measured the extent, I don't really need to count the turns. However, as a good practice, I do mark where this helicoid as well came off, so I can start from the same point. Now I have all the parts disassembled and I can start cleaning. I always put the 2 helicoid parts on a container with lighter fluid outside of the room and I let them sit in there for a while. I then clean up the grease from the back part using lighter fluid. I repeat the process and try to take everything off using various methods. It has to be cleaned very well in order to allow for smooth focusing, especially if somebody wants very light feeling on their focusing, where every small imperfection can be felt. Then I start cleaning up the rest of the back barrel, the iris and focusing ring, as well as the rest of the parts. I'm also having a better look at the individual optical groups and cleaned up a bit the back element. After some time I take off the helicoid parts from a lighter fluid and I start cleaning them up repeatedly and very thoroughly, removing any old grease with any means possible. When I'm done, I test out the individual helicoids without applying any grease so I can feel any imperfections. Despite cleaning up the outer parts, the markings are still quite yellowed, so I have decided to repaint those markings. I'm using enamel paint to fill in the markings and then alcohol to wipe the excess off. The result is certainly much better than before. After I finish with painting, I have started the lubrication process. I use a thin brush to apply and spread the grease very evenly on the parts. I screw back the outer helicoid starting exactly at the point I took it off, bringing it to the same extent that I measured before disassembly. Then I proceed to apply grease to the inner part and the inner helicoid. Again, I use my previous marks to make sure the inner helicoid couples at the exactly right position. Only then the whole system will match the correct position and be locked with the keys, so both close and infinity focus can be achieved. I then lock the system with the two keys. It's nice to apply a very slight amount of grease where the keys slide at to remove any kind of dry feel, but also microsake when changing focusing direction. As I assemble the lens, I keep testing the feel of the helicoids to make sure everything is good, and I take my time to remove and reassemble the helicoid as many times as needed to achieve the best feel possible. This includes assembling other parts of the lens and disassembling again, removing the grease, applying new one, and so on. When I finally get the right feel, I apply some thread lock to the helicoid keys screws. Next, I insert the optical group, making sure to connect the iris pin with the iris ring, and turn it so the screw hole for the little alignment screw comes at the correct position. After I set the screw, I put the metal ring at the right position and insert the focusing ring on top, while being careful to not turn the helicoid, and finally put the 3 screws to tighten the focusing ring onto the helicoid. I'm not applying any thread lock on these for now, since I will still calibrate the lens for perfect infinity later. Next, I screw the front barrel of the lens, which is what will secure the optical group below it. This is a good time to screw the iris ring. In this case, the owner wanted the lens clicked, so I only apply a little grease on the ring and repeat till I get a perfect feel. Then I connect the iris ring with the iris mechanism by screwing back the little screws. It can take a few tries and some tricks to get the iris of AE lenses at the correct alignment and also prevent iris creep when declicking, meaning the iris slowly closing down on its own. Maybe I will make a video in the future about that topic. Finally, I finish up assembling the rest of the mount. This is a good time to check and test everything before assembling back the front group of the lens. I checked the front group carefully and found out the back element could use some little cleaning. Inside it's very clean, except a couple of very small dots between the elements, which are not really worth it opening up this assembly. The front element is quite prone to damage even with good handling, and the elements under it are really hard to clean, so the chances are that after opening it, it's going to be worse than its current clean factory state. In general, it's a very good practice to avoid opening assemblies like these unless there is something really worth cleaning up. I apply some slight grease on the front helicoid as well as the front group. This grease has to be of the light variety because otherwise the focusing feel can become very heavy. Also, since it's directly around the optics, it's a good practice to not put any excess amount. I then set the front group on its metal ring but without tightening the screws. The process of assembling the floating group back to the lens can be a little tricky. I screw the lens group with its ring into the helicoid, and at the same time I make sure the metal ring goes inside the key from the focusing ring. This process needs some good practice and observation of the mechanics to get right. I do this a couple of times and apply grease as needed till I get a good feel in the focus. I then take the lens and go to a chart to calibrate the floating group. This is a whole process, so I will probably make a video just for it sometime in the future. In general, if the front group is put back at the same distance as the one measured at the beginning of this assembly, it will bring the lens into the range of fair performance. In order to have optimal performance though, bringing the lens to a chart is absolutely necessary. I also do the precise infinity focus adjustment just in case the lens was not adjusted properly before I open it. Obviously, all of this can also be done with much less work by using advanced collimation and lens testing equipment in case you have any of these laying around. Finally, I make sure the focusing ring screws are tightened and I apply some thread lock, which is important for preventing many helicoid decoupling accidents people can have when using focus motors on these lenses. Last, I put back the rubber ring, make sure the front element is clean and screw in the front nameplate. At this point, I test the lens, first in my hands, then on camera, then on a chart, making sure everything is optimal. Now this lens can be used without any problems or any worries for many more years to come. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to not open up vintage lenses without the proper tools, patience and experience. Many of these lenses were made only in a few thousand copies. They will never be made again and you might be damaging one of the last good ones. Always start with cheaper and easily replaceable lenses and slowly build up your experience from there. Never force anything, never put too much power and never use improper tools or chemicals. Lens servicing can be very stressful and traumatic to some extent if an expensive and rare lens gets permanently damaged. The Contax D-Stagon 28mm f2 is getting really expensive these days, and despite my detailed video, it's still not an easy lens to service because in less servicing, whatever can go wrong will go wrong. There's still many great technicians out there that can get your lens in perfect shape without all the stress and worries, so make sure to consider all the options. Have a great day and see you next time!